Well, we had to move out of our apartment and move into a section where all the Jews had to go and move in together with two other families into one apartment, which was kind of unpleasant because we had the middle room in that apartment and they kept walking through, so you had absolutely no privacy, you know. You couldn't go shopping in any stores. There were stores which were particularly designated for Jews. And the stuff that they were selling in there was sometimes kind of, it was spoiled. In fact, I got myself into trouble because I always had a big mouth. There was a barrel of potatoes and they stank to high heaven. And the woman who owned it, she of course was not Jewish. I said to her, nobody can eat this stuff. They stink. They're rotten. Well, I got into trouble for that. But not that they changed anything. They threw me out anyway. There was very little we could do. We were limited. You couldn't go to a movie. You couldn't go anywhere. When I was 12, they took a group of children and sent us to northern Germany into the asparagus fields to harvest asparagus. I didn't eat it for years. It wasn't too bad, really, you know, considering what came afterwards. We stayed there for a couple of months, and then the surrounding villages became afraid we had an outbreak of scarlet fever, so they wanted to get rid of us the worst way, which was our luck, by the way. They sent us back home. Other groups of children didn't go home again. They were sent to munitions factories, and God knows where else. Yeah, I had a brother, and he and a friend at the beginning in 1939, they were going, the friend's parents had jewelry and stuff like this, and they wanted to get it out of the country before they go. So those two guys, they were at that time 18 years old, went and were going over the Dutch border into Holland and leave it there. Of course, they got caught. My brother went into a concentration camp. But at that time, that was near Berlin, was called Sachsenhausen. At that time, what they did to young people is they let them out, but they had to leave Germany and Austria and anywhere where the Germans were within 2 weeks. And they lost their citizenship. My brother was, my parents managed to get him on a transport which was going to Palestine, what they called the youth transport, you know. They didn't get very far. In Yugoslavia, the transport was stopped because the Germans were there already too. And they shot every 10th of these kids. My brother managed, he was a great adventurer anyway, as you can see, as he wanted to go to Holland over the border illegally and all of that. He managed to escape and go into the mountains in Yugoslavia, and from there he made his way into Albania, where the Germans had not been. And he found himself a job. He wrote to us, which was very good. We finally found out what was the matter, that he had a job, and then suddenly the mail stopped. And we never heard from him again. And after the war, my sister and I, we got in touch with the Red Cross to find out. They had a very good bureau where they searched for people and they could find out. They wrote us back that he apparently had gone into Italy, and all they can assume that he had joined the guerrillas in the mountains in Italy because they lost all trace of him. Never heard from him again. So He obviously was fighting and got killed. We came to this place which used to be a reform school. It was also like a military thing, you know. Brick houses all around, and it was kind of closed up, but there was nobody there. In fact, they must have run out so fast because in the kitchen there were pans with grease and they're standing there and not much other food. And so we sat there to rest for a minute, and I kept looking around to see what was going on, and I saw that not too far was a barn. And those two girls, where we had become friends, were not sitting too far from me. So I kind of slid over there and I said, I'm thinking of running. And they said, we were just talking about that too. So we watched when these guys were not looking too much, because some of them went into the buildings, I guess, to take a rest or sleep. So there were very few watching us. So at a good moment, we got up and we ran into that building and up the ladder. It was a hayloft, you know, and dug ourselves into the hay. Well, we weren't the first ones. There were, across the pathway, there were a bunch of other women in the hay too. And so, of course, when they were ready to go, everybody had to stand up, and they saw that so many people were missing, so they started looking. And of course, this was the first place they were looking at. So when they came up, they were screaming and yelling, and with their bayonets, they stuck into the hay to find people. And while they had their backs turned to us, where we were on this side, and were screaming at the people on that side, we ran down the ladder and ran across the field into a much bigger barn, and dug ourselves in. That barn was stacked with straw all the way up to the ceiling, and dug ourselves in. We must have been pretty good runners, by the way. Because they came after us too, but as much as they hollered and stuck their bayonets into the straw, they couldn't feel us and they couldn't get us. So they gave up. They had to leave. They couldn't stay there long enough. We were lucky they didn't set it on fire. Anyway, so they left, and we waited until it was dark to make sure there's nobody around. And we stayed in this town. The Russians came fairly soon. And we stayed there until the war was over. My friends didn't, but there was a reason why they didn't. They shipped them into Poland to a hospital. Funnily enough, I moved from New York to England for 6 years. I went there for a month and I stayed 6 years because I got so fed up with the blizzards. There was a winter in '61 which was as bad as this winter is on the East Coast. And I was digging out my car. By that time I had a car. That's all I wanted. I was digging out my car from the snow, and when I came to the car, it wasn't mine. I was digging out somebody else's, and there were some guys passing by who were shoving the snow against the cars. And they were laughing, and I said, "Don't laugh." I said, "Get down and help me." But I was so fed up, I quit my job. And I gave my car to my brother-in-law, and I went to England for a month. I had some distant relatives there. And I stayed 6 years because I had an offer from a factory. By that time, I was doing some designing that they were sending an American exposition to England with American merchandise. And while I'm there, would I run it? And I said, sure, why not? And from that, I got kind of stuck. They opened a factory in England, a very small one. I became the managing director of 2 employees. And it was a very hard pull because, anyway, after 6 years, I got fed up with the weather there, but I wasn't going to move back to New York. I thought this. There was a man on TV, he isn't any longer, and he was called Alistair Cook. He was an Englishman who lived in the States, and he had a Sunday program, and I listened to it, and he was just waxing poetic about California and the redwoods and the water and the Pacific and the sky and the mountains. There was nothing better in the whole world. I figured that's where I'm going. And I did. And here I am.